Again, good morning. I'm going to start with our today's topic is still sexual reproduction in humans. We're going to continue with secondary sexual characteristics and the menstrual cycle, all the joys of puberty. Some of you are still welcoming puberty. Some of you have passed the initial stages a number of years ago. Okay, here we go.
Look at what puberty is. We'll focus on the menstrual cycle. Puberty is basically the period during which adolescents start to develop secondary sexual characteristics, by which we mean things like facial hair in men and breasts in women. This process is triggered by reproductive hormones, which are mainly testosterone in men, which is produced in the testes and also stimulates sperm production, and estrogen in women, which is produced by the ovaries. Now, when it comes to the menstrual cycle, there's quite a lot going on, because there are 4 hormones that interact to bring about the 4 stages of the cycle.
Now,
so what we're going to do here
in some of the literature, you're going to see 3 stages rather than 4. They don't count ovulation itself as a stage, but don't get bogged down with that. Just learn the processes.
is briefly discuss each of those stages, then look at what each of the 4 hormones does, and then finally see how those hormones interact, which is higher tier.
Higher tier means
Before we start though, I just wanted to make it
high
clear
tier
where
means
all this stuff
the AB section, the paper 3 types questions.
is happening. This here is a picture of the female reproductive system. We've got the uterus here in the middle, the uterus lining around it, and the ovaries out here on the sides, which are connected to the uterus by these fallopian tubes. If you remember, eggs are kept inside the ovaries, and after ovulation, they're transported along one of the fallopian tubes over to the uterus. If the egg was fertilized during its journey, then it would implant into the uterus lining. Otherwise, it would break down and pass out. So when we talk about the uterus lining building up or breaking down during the menstrual cycle, we're talking about this tissue here in the uterus lining. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can move on to the menstrual cycle. The average length of a menstrual cycle is around 28 days.
Now remember, average. That doesn't mean that everybody is going to have the same length cycle. Some people have as many as 32 days. Some people have as few as 24, even 20. I have my sympathy.
It varies a lot between different people, and that's perfectly healthy. If you've seen one of these graphs that they use for the menstrual cycle before, then you might have noticed that it's a bit weird. But basically, this red stuff represents the uterus lining, with the y-axis telling us the thickness of the uterus wall. Stage 1 is known as menstruation.
So, in other words, the red stuff is showing you how thick the endometrium is, how thick the uterus lining is. So here at day 4, it is at its thinnest. And it'll be at day 4 here, and again around the end of the edge of the graph where it comes off.
The thickness of the uterus wall. Stage 1 is known as menstruation, which is the period of bleeding that normally lasts about 4 days, and is due to the breakdown of the uterus lining. We can see this on this first section of the graph, where the thickness of the lining is decreasing. Stage 2 is when the uterus...
Most of us refer to the stage 1 or the menstruation as a period when the tissue lining and blood leaves through the vagina, and we capture it on pads or tampons, and now we even have a cup.
Lining starts to build up again and becomes a thick spongy layer with lots of blood vessels in it. It lasts around 10 days, up to day 14, and its role is to prepare the uterus lining for a fertilized egg. Because remember, the fertilized egg implants into the uterus lining.
The implanting of the egg is when it sinks into the uterus lining. There's going to be, when we talk about pregnancy, we're going to learn about the significance of this and how the developing embryo accesses nutrients at this point.
Stage 3 is ovulation. This takes place in a single day and involves the egg being released from one of the ovaries. Stage 4, though, stretches all the way to day 28, and it involves maintaining the lining of the uterus. Once we get to the end of the cycle, if no fertilized egg has made it to the uterus, then the uterus wall would start to break down. So it would be back to stage 1, and the whole cycle would repeat. However, if there was a fertilized egg, then it would implant into the uterus lining and slowly develop into a fetus. Remember that if this does happen, the cycle doesn't go back to stage 1 again. The menstrual cycle would actually stop because the woman's pregnant, so there'd be no need for this cycle.
This is why one of the signs that pregnancy has occurred is when a period stops. Sometimes it's the first time a woman would realize that she is pregnant because she's no longer having a period. And that's because the lining wall isn't being shed. It's there with an implanted egg, fertilized egg.
We now need to take a look at the hormones that are responsible for this cycle. So let's get rid of most of this and draw the hormone levels onto our graph. We've already seen estrogen, which is produced in the ovaries. And what it does here
a lot
is
of us
stimulate
are used to hearing the word estrogen, pronounced estrogen. It really doesn't matter. You just need to know what it does and what it functions in, what it does and where it comes from.
The uterus lining to grow. So we see the level of estrogen increase in stage 2 as the uterus develops, and then fall once the lining is grown. Meanwhile, progesterone, which is also produced in the ovaries, increases in stage 4 and maintains the lining of the uterus. So if progesterone levels drop, then the uterus lining breaks down, and that's what restarts the cycle. The other two hormones are luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And both of these are produced in the pituitary gland, which remember is a small gland behind your eyes, near your brain. The role of FSH is to stimulate one of the eggs to mature in one of the ovaries.
So you get the follicle stimulating hormone. Remember now, hormones don't travel through the body or to where they need to in tubes. They are from ductless glands that have no tubes. And the pituitary gland is a ductless gland. And the follicle stimulating hormone, the FSH, is going to travel in the bloodstream. When the blood gets to the ovaries, it's going to start stimulating the ovaries.
While LH stimulates the release of that egg on day 14, which we call ovulation. The last thing we need to cover is how these hormones interact with one another. Starting at the beginning, FSH stimulates the ovaries to produce estrogen, which is why we see higher levels of FSH just before estrogen starts to increase. As the estrogen levels start to increase though, they start to inhibit FSH, which is an example of negative feedback. But when estrogen levels get high, they stimulate the release of LH, which causes this LH spike and results in ovulation. the last interaction we need to know is that progesterone inhibits both LH and FSH. And that's everything you need to know about the menstrual cycle. So we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
I know that was a lot to absorb in one go, but let's consider that as usual as our introduction. The things we have to keep in mind are the 4 hormones controlling the menstrual cycle. And let's talk about puberty first. I hope you had no difficulty hearing the video. I'm going to show another video a little later on the same topic, but by a different presenter. It's always good to hear the same thing in different ways. It helps you to, what you don't understand in one way by one presenter might be clearer to somebody in another, by another presenter. What I want to show you is again taken from one of your textbooks you may already have, Human Form and Function. So we want to talk about the primary sexual characteristics and your secondary sexual characteristics. The main deal, the big deal, is the formation of sex cells. You have the pituitary gland at the base of the brain, and during puberty, you have these gonad stimulating hormones. Your gonads are your sex organs, and they are released from the pituitary gland and cause the testes and the ovaries to produce sex hormones. And these sex hormones cause the testes to develop and produce male sex cells, or the sperm, and they cause the ovaries to release mature female sex cells, the eggs or the ova, and then females, because of the cycle of the production of these female sex cells, females start having period. Now notice the difference between the male and the female. At puberty, the males start to produce the sex cells. In females, the sex cells are already there in an immature form. And at puberty, they start to mature. So women are actually born with all the eggs already in their ovaries. And at puberty, 1 month at a time, one egg matures each month. So here are some of your secondary sex characteristics. I don't know how things go these days, but your aunts and older family members used to embarrass the life out of you, pointing out your secondary sex characteristics. They say things like, "Oh, look who bumping! Look who got chin on their chin." Embarrassing. Why don't they just let your sex characteristics show up without comment? But you know how our people go. So the sex hormones also cause the development of secondary sex characteristics. Secondary sex characteristics are outward physical features that distinguish males from females. Now, some of the secondary sex characteristics are shared between male and females, and some are not. So if you look at this drawing here, the ones down the middle are the ones that are shared between both groups. For some people during puberty, the skin becomes more oily and it may lead to acne. That doesn't happen for everybody, but it happens to some. And that's in both male and females. Then for males and females, hair grows under the armpit, and you have pubic hair growing in your genital area for both males and females. For men, you have hair growing on the face, not so much for women, and you have the voice deepening. In women, there is also a change in voice, but they call it, I guess they call it modulation for both. But the female modulation more settles the voice into whether you have a soprano singing voice or an alto. Mine is now a spoiler, neither soprano nor alto. Men's voices get deeper into the tenor or bass range, for those of you who sing in choirs. In men, the chest, your shoulder muscles, and your chest muscles develop. Your shoulders broaden, and some men start to grow hair on the chest. There are some adult men who will never grow hair on the chest. Doesn't make them any less masculine. It's just what their genes say. Well, they may get to have a sprig or two. And like I said, the chest muscles develop. In the female, breasts develop and the hips widen. So those are your secondary sex characteristics. You must be able to list them and compare them as well. So, any questions about primary and secondary sexual characteristics? No questions this morning? Y'all want me to call y'all by name, eh? No? No name calling? Okay. No questions. So all of those things are perfectly clear. I would imagine for some of you, you would have done this in junior high, in family life, as well as in as part of your health science classes. And hopefully when you yourself went through puberty, your parents helped to explain it, or you looked it up on the internet for yourself. So that part should be clear to you all. Okay, we'll go on to talk about the menstrual cycle then, which is it possible for males to have some female, not the secondary sexual characteristics. There are some people who are born with more with both organs, but that's a different issue altogether. And when we talk about female characteristics, in this case, we are specifically talking about physiological characteristics, not characteristics that society has decided is male and female. We're talking about the development of breasts and the broadening of the hips in females, and we're talking about the deepening of the voice, the growth of chest hair, the growth of pubic hair, the widening of the chest in males. So don't confuse physiological, biological sexual characteristics with societal descriptions. Okay, so some of you have just joined us. I'm going to talk about the menstrual cycle using, and once again, these are not PowerPoints that I have created. I have gotten them online. They will be posted. You can search for them yourself, but you'll find that there are so many available. I just wanted to narrow down your search, because for me, when I did these, it took quite a number of hours, and I would like to save you some of those hours. So let's talk, we know about the human gametes, sperm and the ovum. And we remember how they are, one is smaller and larger, one's tadpole-like, the other one is spherical, like a nice big ball. The nucleus is in the head, the nucleus is towards the center, the sperm are mobile, the ova are not. So here we go, secondary sexual characteristics. During puberty, in a male, you have here in the pubic region, the facial and the axillary region. That's under your arms, axial region. And your larynx, you have the growth of the larynx, you know, the Adam's apple, and the voice breaks, the voice deepens. And you have muscular development with the broadening of the chest and the widening of the shoulders. In females, you have breast development, hips widen, you have more fats layered under the skin, and there's menstruation, the joy of growing up female. And also there is still the pubic hair and the axial hair that you find in males as well. So the menstrual cycle, it happens once in about 28 days. It is not written in stone that it must be 28 days. In some it's shorter, some longer. The uterine lining becomes thickened and 14 days after menstruation to prepare it for the fertilized ovum to implant in it, if there is a fertilized ovum. So the thickening of the lining, and in menstruation, there's a discharge of the lining, the tissue, the blood, if there's no fertilization. That's your period. In your ovary, you have the maturation or the growth of a follicle. You have a mature follicle. Follicles are called Graafian follicles, and that after the release of the after ovulation becomes a yellow body or the corpus luteum. So for the first 5 days, the changes in the lining of this, it breaks down, it gets thinner. Then from day 5 to day 14, the thickness of the lining increases. And at day 28, you have, if there's no implantation, the uterine lining breaks down and menstruation starts. Sorry. Okay. This is a more detailed drawing of the menstrual cycle, which we're going to go and talk about again. But let's start at the top where it says gonadotropic hormones. Gonadotropic means hormones that are going to affect your gonads, hormones that are going to affect the sex organs, hormones that are going to affect your ovaries and the testes. So you have luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, LH and FSH. And here we go back again to the uterine lining. Day 0 to 5, it breaks down. Then from 5 to about 14, it starts to build up again. And 15 to 28, it stays higher unless if there's no implantation, it starts to break down again. Events in the hormone, you have the egg developing. Sorry. You have the egg developing, Graafian follicle developing, and then the Graafian follicle releases the egg, and you're left with your corpus luteum, which develops. And the hormones produced by the ovaries are estrogen and progesterone. And you can see the estrogen increases up to about when ovulation occurs, and it starts to decrease. And progesterone level is steady, and then after ovulation, it starts to increase and maintains. So here's what happens inside your ovary. You have these follicles. You can see them maturing until you have a mature Graafian follicle. So you have a follicle and a yellow body, and they secrete different types of sex hormones. If no fertilization occurs, the yellow body disappears after a few days, and no sex hormones secreted. Menstruation, and you get a discharge of the uterine lining, as if there's no fertilization. So here we have your primary follicle, which you have with you all the time from birth. Then it grows, and you get your Graafian follicle with your egg, and the Graafian follicle at ovulation releases the egg, and then you have your corpus luteum develop. And if there's no fertilization, the corpus luteum degenerates or breaks down. I don't remember seeing this exact diagram by itself in an exam, but it has come as a part of a larger diagram. So here, day 0 to day 5, menstruation occurs with the uterine lining breaking down, and the unfertilized ovum is discharged through the vagina. Day 5 to 14, this is before ovulation. The uterine lining starts to thicken, you get increased blood supply for food and oxygen, and the preparation to receive the fertilized ovary. Day 14, ovulation occurs. Then day 14 to 28, the uterine lining becomes very thick, ready to receive a fertilized ovum. If there is fertilization, no fertilization, then the cycle begins again. If you practice drawing a little cycle like this and saying what happens at each stage, it will help you to remember. It will help you to remember the stages of the menstrual cycle, so that if you do see the graph, you don't start freaking out, oh, what does this graph mean? The graph is confusing me. No, graph is not confusing you once you know what happens at each stage. So if fertilization does occur, the ovum, that is when the ovum meets the sperm in the ovary are confused, then no menstruation occurs and the uterine lining will not break down. That was a lot to absorb. I'm hoping that you were able to follow the amount of the purpose of the different hormones and what they impact and affect. Are there any questions? Questions asking if I'm going to leave the link. Yes, I have sent it to the relevant authorities, and they will be uploading them as soon as possible. Okay, a person who has a more than 5-day period may likely have a longer cycle, a longer menstrual cycle. Remember, 28 days is an approximation. It is not the same for everybody. Some people's cycle are as long as 35 days. Some people are as short as 20. There are ranges that are considered abnormal, if you're not sure if yours falls in the normal range, then you should check with a gynecologist. But having one less than 28 days or more than 28 days is quite normal, and it's nothing to be afraid of. The vagina cleans itself the vagina and the uterus wall have muscles, basically, and they squeeze. Okay, so they squeeze your things out, and again, that might be some of the reason for cramps as well. The contractions of the uterus. You can do some research if you have bad cramps. There are some things that you can do to alleviate your period cramps. If they're really bad, then you again need to check your gynecologist. I think that once you've hit puberty, you should try and see, check with your family doctor or the doctor, so that you can ask them your questions and get the facts rather than listening to other people give you misinformation. Are there any questions on the hormones and how they do their job? Okay, I'm going to show another video other than the one I showed at first. It's going to have the same information, but just by a different presenter. So those of you who missed the video at the beginning, I'll be showing another one. I really thought there'd be more questions than this. As we go through the video, could you write them down, please? And I'd really like to make sure that this is very clear.
So they haven't yet, because that was another question I asked. Oh, no, they don't. Yeah, wait, stop and say it again. Because remember that time I asked, I said we don't want. And you said generate. I think you said there's a generator.
Sorry, getting distracted with all my things on here. Okay. Ooh, that's not the one I wanted to show. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it?
Come on, you don't need to play that. But then it has to be the document.
Sorry, it's taking so long to load. Oops, this is the same one we saw already.
In today's video, we're going to look at how you add and subtract fractions. And there are really two key points you need to know.
That is not my video. Give me a minute. Oh, wow.
Today's video is all about the reproductive hormones. And after a brief look at what puberty is, we'll focus.
Excuse me. Obviously, this is too early in the morning for me. And I am making mistakes. Boop, 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 boop. La da da da. Yes, I began having my technical difficulties that I thought that I had gotten rid of. This is a gentleman that we've been using for the past couple of days.
Now, every month, the female body prepares for pregnancy. This is a big deal. It has to get ready every month in case it gets pregnant. If it doesn't work, you don't get pregnant that month, it resets and it does the whole thing again the following month. This involves releasing an egg each month and also making sure the uterus is in perfect condition for an embryo to be implanted in it. As I said, if pregnancy does not occur, the body resets and it starts the whole process again. And this whole monthly cycle is what we call the menstrual cycle, and it's controlled by hormones. The menstrual cycle lasts on average 28 days. That's just an average figure. Sometimes it can be a lot longer, sometimes shorter. It changes month to month, but on average, and for the sake of learning, we just keep it simple at 28 days. And you can break it down into 4 key phases. Phase 1 is the menstruation phase, when you actually have the bleeding. This lasts for about 4 days as the uterus lining breaks down. Then phase 2 is the uterus lining starting to build up again, builds up and up for about 10 days. Then phase 3, ovulation, an egg is released. And then phase 4 is about keeping that uterus lining perfect condition, maintained, in case that egg is fertilized and implants in the uterus lining. It's controlled by 4 hormones. If you're doing dual science, you need to know about each
When
and
they're talking about dual
progesterone.
science, they're talking about whether you're doing, for us, it means whether you're doing the core only or if you're doing extended. So if you're doing core, detailed knowledge of estrogen and progesterone is needed. If you're doing extended, you need to know about progesterone, estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone.
About all 4, LH and FSH as well. Now, estrogen and progesterone are both produced in the ovaries. Estrogen, as you can see here, spikes sort of early on between about sort of day 7 and about day 12. And what it does is it causes the lining to build up, for the lining to get thicker and thicker. And it also stimulates another hormone which is going to lead to that egg being released. Progesterone is then, as you can see by the green line on the graph, much higher in the second half, in that 4th phase, where you maintain the lining to your uterus. That's because progesterone maintains that lining. And it also stops any further eggs being released, because you don't want another egg to be released at that point if you've already released one and you might be pregnant. LH and FSH are both produced by the pituitary gland in the brain. The LH spikes to cause the egg to be released at ovulation, and it gets stimulated by the estrogen. So estrogen goes up first, that causes LH to be released, and then that causes the egg to be released. FSH increases in order to get an egg to mature in the ovary, and it's also inhibited by progesterone. So when progesterone is high in the second half of the cycle, again, you don't want an egg to be released at that point, so progesterone inhibits the production of FSH. And it causes an egg to mature inside a follicle in the ovaries to get an egg ready to be released.
So this is what you're going to have to focus on. And sometimes this whole thing comes together as a graph where you have the bottom representing the lining of the uterus, the thickness, and then you have your ovarian hormone levels, the estrogen in the gold, and your progesterone in the green, and you have your pituitary hormones, your FSH, and your LH. We are very clear on what happens when. I don't see any questions.
Is this thing on? On, yes, on. Hey guys, glad you could join me today. My name is Miss Burrows, and today we are exploring prepositions. So come on, and let's take our rightful positions with prepositions. Boys and girls, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify and define prepositions. You will also be able to demonstrate the correct usage of prepositions in sentences. Hi, I'm Betsy, the preposition bucket. You are probably just as confused as I was about this topic, but believe me, Miss Burrows will make you a preposition pro in no time. Why, thank you, Patsy. Yes, boys and girls, you all will be natural prepositional pros. So are you ready? Then come on. Remember when I said that we will be taking our rightful positions? Well, that's just what a preposition is. A word that tells the position of a noun or pronoun. A preposition is a word that tells you where or when something is in relation to something else. A preposition can also be described as a word that connects a noun or pronoun to the rest of the sentence. Prepositions tell us location, time, and direction. Some examples of prepositions include words like after, before, on, under, beside, near, behind, through, over, towards, inside, and outside. Let's take a look at this example. After walking for miles, she rested on a hill. In this sentence, after tells us when she rested and on tells us where she rested. You are spot on, Patsy. Let's jump in. It's activity time. Let us use our prepositional powers to tell the location of the mouse in relation to the table. The mouse is moving like the table. Good job! The mouse is moving toward the table. Let's give it another go. Where's the mouse located? Awesome sauce, boys and girls. The mouse is on the table. Care to give it another try? Come on, let's go. Where's the mouse now? The mouse is under the table. Way to go, boys and girls. Let's try another one. Can you spot the mouse? Awesome! The mouse is behind the table. Your brains are percolating today. Let's try another one. Where's the mouse? You guys are spot on. The mouse is beneath the table. Let's give it another go. Where's the mouse? Hooray! You guys are amazing. The mouse is next to the table. Let's go over what we've learned today. Remember that prepositions are words that connect a noun or pronoun to the rest of the sentence. Prepositions also tell us location, time, and direction. Here are some examples of prepositions. Beneath, under, after, on, around, over, and through. See you guys next time for another great grammar adventure.